The U.S. Secretary of State delivered this message to Israeli leaders yesterday. The only path to lasting peace in the Middle East is a Palestinian state.
Secretary Blinken did stand in full support of Israel against charges of genocide. He called out South Africa for their meritless and galling accusations. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has more.
Secretary of State Blinken met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and military leaders to discuss what he says is needed for regional peace.
As I told the Prime Minister, every partner that I met on this trip said that they're ready to support a lasting solution that ends the long-running cycle of violence and ensures Israel's security. But they underscored that this can only come through a regional approach that includes a pathway to a Palestinian state.
Israeli leaders did not publicly respond, but they're opposed to a Palestinian state. Blinken stood with the Jewish state against South Africa's claim to the International Court of Justice that Israel is committing genocide.
Moreover, the charge of genocide is meritless. It's particularly galling, given that those who are attacking Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as their supporter Iran, continue to openly call for the annihilation of Israel and the mass murder of Jews.
He also said Palestinian civilians should be allowed to return to northern Gaza when the time is right and not pressured to leave. Israel says there needs to be major changes in Gaza after Hamas is dealt with, including the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA.
UNRWA is an organization of the United Nations that is a complete cover-up for Hamas activities, okay, and terrorist activities. Hamas has taken over this organization. And so we knew this for a while. But now, after the 7th of October, we have to take their masks off and tell the world what UNRWA is doing.
Knesset member Sharon Haskell convened a meeting of the caucus to reform UNRWA on Tuesday.
They are inciting and educating children to violence and hatred. They're teaching them martyrdom, how to be child soldiers. That's their education system. It's based on radical Islam. And, you know, the international community is paying for it.
UNRWA began in 1949 after hundreds of thousands of Arabs fled their homes during Israel's War of Independence. It's the only UN refugee agency made for a specific group of people and including their descendants forever.
UNRWA has been a turbocharged engine of terror coming out of Gaza, which has become a forward base for the IRGC and the Iranian regime.
Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, says there needs to be international supervision of UNRWA led by the U.S.
It's the Iranian regime that is mobilizing UNRWA with its Hamas proxy to incite to the murdering of Jews and Israelis, to carry out acts of terror.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, it's time for UNRWA to be defunded, and please keep in mind your tax dollars are going to fund UNRWA. President Trump stopped U.S. payments to UNRWA, and President Biden reinstated them. They've been going on from administration after administration since 1948 until the Trump administration. It's time for it to end because it's quite clear that all it is doing is funding terrorism. It's providing staff salaries to Hamas terrorists. It's providing funding for the building of tunnels and rockets. These things have to stop. The indoctrination of children, all happening in UNRWA schools. And so let's wake up to that and say no more. In terms of a two-state solution, I think the State Department is absolutely dreaming because the Palestinians don't want two states. They want one state, and they want to call it the State of Palestine. The world needs to recognize that's a brand new thing. It's never existed before. There was no Palestinian state ever. How did we get the name Palestine? Well, it comes from Emperor Hadrian. He was responding to a Jewish revolt against Roman rule all the way back in 130 to 135 AD. After the revolt, he decided, I want to wipe out the Jewish people. I want to make sure they can never exist again. So he did three horrible things. Number one, he plowed the Temple Mount so the foundations could never be built on again. There could never be another Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Number two, he destroyed their genealogies so they could no longer trace who are part of the priesthood, the Cohen, who are part of the royalty from the tribe of Judah. He intentionally wanted to wipe out their history, so he destroyed the genealogies. And then third, he renamed the country. So it would no longer be called Israel. He chose the term Syria Palestina, and he particularly took Palestina from the Philistines, the traditional enemies of Israel. That's the real history here, and anything else is some kind of invented fiction. To call Israeli citizens somehow colonizers from Europe, that they don't have any traditional ties to the land, the Jewish population hasn't existed, is absolute fiction. But that's what the Palestinians teach their children. And they teach their children, we want to be free from the river to the sea. That means Israel wiped off the map. Let's not ignore that. If you want to have peace, you have to make sure the other side wants to have peace, and Palestine, the Palestinians, do not want it.